Hi, AP students. My name is Mrs. Soper, and I'm coming to you from Jackson, Michigan. I teach at Northwest High School, Go Mounties, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the essay in general that you'll be taking on the AP Lit test. One of the things that I always notice when my students come in, no matter what their experience is with former AP classes or writing in general, whether or not they took AP Lang, I always think that they seem to be most nervous for those essays. It's a time situation, it's a bit of pressure, and so that tends to be what they're nervous about a lot of times. But I'm here to help you with some tips and tricks and hopefully relieve a little bit of that stress and make you feel like you know what you're going into and that you kind of have a little bag of tools that you can use to help you feel more confident on that test day. So you probably already know by now, and I have a little slide up here for you, that there are three types of questions on the AP Lit test. You will have 120 minutes total, which means roughly about 40 minutes per essay. You hopefully already know that you're always going to have a Q1, which is always going to be a poem. You're always going to have a Q2, which is always going to be a prose passage. And then you're always going to have a Q3, which is going to be kind of the open question where you're writing on a play or a novel of your choice that corresponds with the prompt. So one of the things I think that's really important is to go in with a strategy of how you want to write this and how you want to use these 120 minutes. Some of my students who have taken AP Lang, it especially stresses them out because in the AP Lang test, they had that extra 15 minutes of reading time and they don't anymore. So they're just not quite sure how to approach it and feel confident about the timing. So I have a couple things here that could be ideas for you, and I would suggest maybe practicing both ways if you can and seeing what works best for you. So the first strategy, this is the thing that I've always taught my students, is to actually go and read all three passages first. So you're reading the prompt quickly, you're skimming the passage, the poetry and the prose passage, and you're reading the prompt for Q3. Not spending a ton of time on them, but just kind of reading them to get a sense of how you feel about them. Then you're going to pick in order what you think is the easiest one first, the hardest one second, and then the middle one last. The reason for this being is, first of all, by reading them all first, you're going to kind of be subconsciously thinking of these prompts as you go. And also, then by writing the easiest first, your mind is going to be kind of opening up. You're going to get into the swing of things. And once again, still processing those other prompts subconsciously. We want you to write your hardest one second because we don't want you to wait till the very end to write the hardest one and then you're running out of time and you're trying to interpret the passage and figure out what you're going to say. So the hardest one second, and then the middle one is last. That way, if for some reason you don't have the full 40 minutes and you only have 35 or 30 maybe because you spent a little longer, especially on that hard passage, then hopefully that will allow you to still write something pretty solid if it's not your hardest one that you're saving for last. A second strategy that many of my friends who are AP Lit teachers teach all of you to do is to just make sure that you go in with a plan, regardless of what types of prompts they are. So no matter what, you go in and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do Q1, Q2, Q3 in order. I want to write them in order. That's what I'm going to do. Maybe you've practiced that way in class and maybe that feels good to you. A lot of students go in and they automatically want to write Q3 first. The reason for this is because Q3 is the one that you can prepare for the most because you can kind of go in already with some solid ideas about certain novels or plays, and you can be ready to really show what you know on them. Okay, so here's just some common questions that I get from my students that I always want to clear up. So this is called Yes, You Can. So yes, you can write your essays out of order. Just make sure that you label them in the top corner where you have that little box. I will say we as readers, if they are mislabeled or not labeled, we do our very best to make sure that we are reading the correct Q1, the correct thing for Q2 and Q3. But if they're out of order, it's really no problem. And we'll also try our best to find them, even if for some reason they are mislabeled. But obviously it's easier if they're labeled correctly. The second thing is, yes, you can cross off words. You can cross off words, you can make little arrows, you can add things in if you need to. We understand that you are writing in pen, that you are writing for 40 minutes, and that this is a rough draft. Do we want it to be lovely? Of course, but is that actually a reality? Probably not, right? So we understand there's going to be some errors and some crossouts, and we as readers, we really just kind of skim right over those, and those do not have any kind of bearing on how we grade the essay. That being said, it's also okay to make minor mistakes. If you have a little bit of a misspelled word, or if you're really thinking hard and you're trying to find a word for repetition and you want the word anaphora, but you just can't remember it and you're taking a guess, just use repetition. Don't try too hard to say a different word that might be wrong. Don't try too hard to spell something that you're not sure of. Just show us, this way I always tell my students, show us what you do know, because it's not that big of a deal. And if you do have a mistake or two, that's okay as well. You can write a one-sentence thesis statement. I'm sure that many of your teachers have talked to you about lovely introductions and lovely thesis statements, but especially if you're running out of time, writing just a one-sentence thesis statement and even a one-sentence introduction is okay if you have to do that. It's also okay to not use any books off of Q3. I believe my friend Mr. Smith is going to be talking to you about this, but I'm sure he will tell you that you do not have to choose any of those books. So I wouldn't even spend much of your time reading through that list as long as you can think of something on your own. Okay, here's a few things to try not to do that just make it harder for us as readers. So try, please, pretty please try not to have super sloppy handwriting. We will try our absolute best to decipher it, but it does make it harder. And I think what happens is it impedes our understanding because it impedes the flow in which we can read it. So as we're trying to hear your ideas and your voice, if we're stopping every few words to figure out what word it is that you wrote, that's where it makes it difficult, because we want to be able to really hear you through your writing instead of being worried about what it is that you are writing and specifically which words. Please don't do what some of my students do when they're not very confident. They start and then they stop and then they restart and they cross off huge chunks. I always tell them all you're doing is wasting your precious time. It's okay if you want to cross off a sentence, but when you're writing a whole paragraph and then crossing it off and then crossing it off again, it usually is not worth it for the time in which you have. I've also had my students sometimes look at the paragraph they crossed off and then look at the current one, and usually they're not that different. So instead of going back and thinking about what you already wrote, try to continue to write better. We as readers will reward you, whether it's that your paper starts off really strong or if it kind of comes together at the end. We're going to reward you either way because we're looking for you to just present your ideas. This is not a big deal. It's not like you're once again going to get penalized for this, but you do not have to write the line numbers. Believe me, we've been reading the passage over and over and over again, so we know it very well. And really, you're just using up a lot of time. So I just wouldn't even worry about that. Just get those little quotes in there, but don't worry about the actual line numbers themselves. And if you absolutely run out of time, if you have only 5 minutes left, do not keep just working on one essay or two. If you only have 2 of your essays done, try to at least turn to that last page, that last essay, and at least write a thesis statement or write a thesis with a few pieces of evidence, because having something there is better than not having anything. And then you can at least prove to them something that you know and get rewarded some points for that. That is all I really have about the essays in general. I wish you the best of luck, and I'm sure you are in great hands with your AP Lit teacher. And I look forward to reading your essays come June.